This video is sponsored by Brilliant. For some reason, I've always found Greenland fascinating. The land at the edge of our maps is often overlooked, forgotten, marked as containing no data. When I tell people I'd like to travel there, the looks on their faces are often of astonishment. And I can understand why. It's cold, desolate, out of the way. Its cities are linked by no roads, instead separated by an enormous, impenetrable sheet of ice that stretches over 1,000 miles. Only 56,000 people call it home. In many places, its population would be comparable to just a big town. But Greenland, I think, deserves a little more of our attention. Only the four great continental landmasses, Afro-Eurasia, the Americas, Antarctica, and Australia, are larger than it. And the world's largest island is arguably also its largest colony, though not ruled over in the traditional sense. Its status is a major point of contention, and a push for independence has been strong in recent years. Today, Greenland faces a number of major challenges: a melting ice sheet, traditional cultures increasingly under threat, the highest suicide rate in the world, and an economy dependent on a power a continent over that a large majority of its population wishes to no longer be a part of. Greenland, Kalaallit Nunaat, has a story worth hearing. And so I went to Greenland, to meet its people, to hear its stories, and to explore a land that's beautiful, strange, and fascinating. I hope you'll join me for this episode, as well as for a number of other videos I'm making on the island, as I try to do its story justice. Hello and welcome to That Is Interesting. I'm your host, Carter. This is The Nation Explained, a deep dive into a land, its people, and their past, present, and future. Episode 2, Greenland. Before we get started, a quick note on pronunciations. I always take pronunciations very seriously when making my videos. Though most of my videos have a US focus, place names across the country can vary quite differently in their pronunciations, and I always spend significant time researching how place names are spoken in local dialects so as to do them justice. For this video, it's been particularly difficult. There's not a lot of information available about Greenland in general. That's part of the reason I went there, and finding reputable pronunciations online can be quite a challenge. For this video, I was only able to do so for roughly a third of the Greenlandic language names used in this video. I tried reaching out to several Greenlanders, but didn't have much luck. So, to fill in the blanks, I found a letter-by-letter Greenlandic pronunciation guide, which is how I'll be pronouncing the other two-thirds of the Greenlandic words that I couldn't find audio pronunciations for. I tried my best, but the language is very difficult and uses a number of sounds that are rarely used in English, so it's not going to be perfect. In case you're interested in learning more about particular locations or topics, I'll additionally show each Greenlandic word on the screen the first time I say it because their spellings are not always obvious phonetically. Okay, let's get started. According to the Köppen climate classification, Greenland sits within two main climate zones. The coastal regions on the edge of the island have a tundra climate, where summers can occasionally be warm, but most of the year faces extremely cold weather. Temperatures below freezing for most of the year, and weather so cold that soil freezes beneath the surface, in what is known as permafrost. Because of this, tundra biomes are usually treeless. On top of that, the coasts have little soil, and plant life in general is sparse, mostly grasses and small bushes. It's mostly mosses growing on the rocks that bring color to the landscape. There's only one forest in the entire island, in the Kingwa Valley in Greenland's far south, and this lack of plant life can make survival difficult for both humans and wild animals, but both have managed. It's home to wildlife like muskox, reindeer, polar bears, seals, whales, and of course the Greenland shark. Other than Greenland, tundra climates are primarily found in the far polar regions of the globe. The northern regions of Canada and Russia, for example, Patagonia in the south, as well as in parts of Mongolia, Alaska, Norway, and most of Iceland. On top of that, the very high peak regions of mountain ranges like the Himalayas, Alps, Andes, Caucasus Mountains, Rockies, and Sierra Nevada are home to tundra climates. The interior of the island, however, is part of an even colder climate type, the ice cap climate zone. Along with a few other islands around the North and South Poles and a few very high mountains, ice-cap climates are really found en masse in only one other part of the world, the continent of Antarctica, and lack even a single month of the year with temperatures above freezing. This allows a permanent sheet of ice and snow to build up. Greenland's ice sheet is simply massive. It takes up 80% of the island, leaving its entire interior uninhabitable and difficult to cross, and is in some places nearly 2 miles or 3 kilometers tall. On top of that, it contains 8% of all the fresh water on the planet, an incredible amount that's dwarfed by the 60% of the Earth's fresh water in the Antarctic ice sheet. The ice sheet not only prevents agriculture, provides freezing temperatures year-round, and would make the construction of towns incredibly difficult, but it also prevents the construction of roads across it, leaving most towns and cities which sit on the coast cut off by fjords or located on coastal islands, accessible to only one another by boat, plane, or helicopter. This also means that any potential city on the ice sheet would be very difficult to supply with food and goods, and because of that, it has no full-time residents. The one exception are research stations. There are a number of them located throughout the island, but only one deep in the ice sheet, called Summit Camp. This small station sits on the highest point of the ice sheet and is home to around 38 researchers. A number of its buildings are on stilts to survive the winters, which as few as 5 researchers stick around for. Under the ice, Greenland is thought to be made up of 3 different islands with a sea in the middle. The island is split between 4 different time zones. Most of Greenland is in a time zone called West Greenland time, 3 hours behind the Greenwich Mean Time in London and 2 behind during daylight savings when it's known as West Greenland summertime. It's 2 hours ahead of Eastern time in the US and is the same time zone used in eastern Brazil and Argentina. In the northwestern tip of the island, a chunk of land containing both the northern city of Qaanaaq and the Bitufik Space Base, the U.S. military's northernmost base, is in Atlantic time, 1 hour behind West Greenland time, 4 behind Greenwich, and 1 hour ahead of Eastern time in the U.S. It observes daylight savings as well. It's the same time zone Labrador, Canada's maritime provinces, Bermuda, and much of the Caribbean are in, as well as South American countries like Venezuela, Guyana, Paraguay, Bolivia, Chile, and western Brazil. On the east coast of Greenland, 2 chunks of land are in different time zones as well. The area around the isolated eastern city of Ittoqqortoormiit is in East Greenland time. Normally an hour behind Greenwich time, the times are the same for the part of the year it observes daylight savings. Finally, the Danish research station of Denmarkstown on the east coast is in Greenwich time all year, never observing daylight savings. This means for part of the year, it's in the same time zone as Ittoqqortoormiit, and for part of the year, an hour ahead. So far to the north, the sun is up all day in the summer, while the skies are dark for much of the winter, what's known as the midnight sun. Greenland's name comes from Viking Eric the Red, who founded a colony of Norse settlers there in the year 983. He called it Greenland, which translates in English to Greenland, in part as a ploy to attract more settlers to the colony, and in part because at the time temperatures were warmer than they are today, and the area where they settled, in the very south of Greenland, was and is generally the warmest part of the island. Even today, agriculture is possible there, and there are a few farms. In the era of Viking settlement, calling the island a green land was not as much of an exaggeration as it would seem today. In Danish, a language descended from Old Norse, the island is called by the very similar name of Grönland. Its official name, though, the one most of its population uses, is Kalaallit Nunaat. It means land of the Kalaallit, the largest ethnic group on the island, in their language, Kalaallisut. Greenland's flag is one of my favorites. It's simple and iconic, with a red and white stripe whose colors are switched on a circle. The white stripe represents the ice sheet, the red stripe the ocean, and the circle depicts both the sun setting over the ocean on the horizon, as well as an iceberg sitting just below the surface. It's a unique design that incorporates the island's landscape well, and it's popular. You'll see it flying everywhere throughout Greenland. Greenland, simply put, is massive. It takes up a land area of 836,000 square miles, or 2.166 million square kilometers. For comparison, Alaska, the largest U.S. state and one of the largest national subdivisions in the world, is 570,000 square miles. Add on Texas, the US's second largest state, which can take over 12 hours to drive across, and Greenland is still larger than the two combined. Only 12 entire countries take up more land than Greenland. It's larger than all of Mexico, for example, though not the continent of Africa, as certain warped map projections might have you believe. Because it sits so close to the North Pole, projections often will stretch out the north of the island to have it fit on a 2D rectangular map, making the north of Greenland look far more massive than it actually is, and giving the island a wildly different shape than it actually has. That's not to say, though, that it isn't enormous. It's the fifth largest landmass on the planet and the world's largest island. If you overlaid it on the US, it would stretch from the northern tip of Minnesota to the southern tip of Texas. Its eastern and western coastlines, in some places, would be as far from each other as Wyoming is from Wisconsin. On the other hand, it has a tiny population. Only 56,643 people live in Greenland, a smaller population than 641 different US cities, for example. Small cities like Dubuque, Iowa, are home to more people in their city limits than all of Greenland. Every US state and 3 US territories, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the US Virgin Islands, have larger populations than Greenland. It surpasses only American Samoa and the Northern Marianas. While only 12 countries have more land than it, only 11 have fewer people, making it by far the most sparsely populated country, territory, or dependency on the face of the earth. It's not even close. The place with the second lowest population density, the Falkland Islands, are still 10 times more densely populated than Greenland, and Alaska, the massive and sparsely populated US state, is 6.5 times more densely populated than it. If everyone on the island was evenly spread out, each person would have nearly 13 entire square miles to themselves. Only Antarctica, which is not officially a country and has no permanent population, is less densely populated than Greenland. Greenland is geographically part of North America, though not located on the mainland of the continent, and it has close ties to Europe due to relatively close proximity compared to the rest of the continent, and its history of very recent European colonization. It consists of one main island, Greenland, and a number of other smaller ones offshore, most notably Disco Island off the west coast, which is larger than Delaware. Greenland sits between the Arctic Ocean to the north and the Atlantic Ocean to the south. Kaffeklubben, a small island belonging to Greenland, just off of the main island's northern tip, is thought to be the northernmost piece of land on the planet. And Station Nord, a military and research station in the island's northeast, is the second northernmost inhabited place on Earth, after just another research station in Canada, Alert. To the east, the Greenland Sea separates it from the Norwegian possessions of Svalbard and Jan Mayen, and to the southeast, the Denmark Strait separates it from Iceland. To the southwest, the Canadian region of Labrador sits across the Labrador Sea. To the west and northwest, Baffin Island and Ellesmere Island, Canadian islands that are both among the 10 largest in the world and are both part of the majority Inuit territory of Nunavut, sit across Baffin Bay and the Nares Strait, respectively. At the strait's narrowest point, mainland Greenland is only 13 miles from Ellesmere Island, but Canada and Greenland actually now share a tiny land border. It's only about 1 kilometer in length, but the tiny Hans Island was subject for years until it was settled in 2022 to a strangely good-natured border dispute between Canada and Greenland, which saw Denmark and Canada planting their flags, taking down the other flag, and leaving a bottle of alcohol for soldiers from the other country to enjoy. Though there's flatter land in the north, most of Greenland's coast is rugged, barren, and mountainous. Massive fjords snake inland, and tall island peaks jut out of the water. The mountains, along with the fjords and the ice sheet, hem people in, leaving each town isolated from the next, accessible more by boat and air than road. There are rivers, but none are very long. They all flow out from melting glaciers on the edge of the ice sheet into the fjords that surround the island's coast. In many parts of Greenland, you can even drink from small streams flowing down the mountain slopes without treating the water, as it's pure snowmelt. Greenland is split into 3 traditional regions and 5 municipalities. The 3 regions, Kita, Tunu, and Avana, were once administrative divisions, but are not formalized anymore. Each roughly corresponds to the homelands of Greenland's 3 major Inuit ethnic groups, the Kalaallit, Tunumit, and Inukhoi, respectively. Despite Greenland having such a small population, its people are spread out throughout 72 different cities, towns, and settlements, some often very remote, existing in extreme isolation from one another, and the average town size is less than 1,000 people. The region of Avanna, or North Greenland, encompasses the northern part of the island, stretching from the northern end of Baffin Bay to a peninsula called Kronprins Christian Land that juts out into the Greenland Sea. It's home to a vast, empty, and wild regions like Kronprins Fredrik Land and Piri Land in the north, and Laugakust and Knud Rasmussen Land in the northwest. It's the homeland of the Inukhoi people, who speak a language called Inuktun, and migrated to Greenland in the 1700s from northern Canada's Victoria and Banks Islands. Most of its population lives in the area around the city of Qaanaaq, a town of just 591 people that's the largest in the region and the heart of the Inukhoi people. Avanna is Greenland's emptiest, most remote, coldest, and most inaccessible region, with only one airport in Qaanaaq that can be only reached from another city in Greenland, Upangavik. The Inukhoi are sometimes even referred to as the Polar Inuit, living so far north in the Arctic Circle. The region of Tunu, or East Greenland, extends along Greenland's east coast from the Kronprins Christian Land Peninsula in the north to nearly the southern tip of the island. It's the historic homeland of the Tunumit, who speak a language of the same name. Though more closely related to the Kalaallit than to the Inukhoi, the people of Greenland's east coast have been separated from those of its west coast by centuries and hundreds of miles of ice. Though a much larger region than Avanna and much further to the south, Tunu has a similarly small population, just a few thousand in and around the cities of Tassilok and Itokortormi, home to 1,914 and 343 people, respectively. Sea ice has historically frozen over the ocean along the east coast of Greenland during the winter, while leaving its west coast clear. This made travel, trade, and settlement much more difficult for the Tunumit, but also spared them from as much Danish colonization as in the west. Despite being far closer to Europe, the ice made Tunu hard to reach. On top of that, Danish settlements were mostly founded in the west, and a colonial policy promoting urbanization to make fishing cheaper saw Denmark move jobs and entire towns to the west. Eastern Greenland is filled with ghost towns along the coast, as people moved west under colonial rule and continue to do so as a modernizing economy makes living outside a population center less viable on the island. Much of Tunu remains remote and difficult to access today. Neither Tassilok nor Itokortormi have airports in the town, and can only be accessed by snowmobile, helicopter, or boat from nearby regional airports. The airport closest to Itokortormi, which sits on Kongertitivok, Greenland's largest fjord, doesn't even offer flights to anywhere else on the island. It can only be accessed by leaving the country, and flying in from the Icelandic city of Akureyri, which it's closer to than any other Greenlandic city. Finally, Kita, or Western Greenland. This is the home of the Kalaallit, Greenland's largest ethnic group, and for reasons I just mentioned, most of its population. In fact, 13 of Greenland's 15 largest cities are all in Kita, including Nuuk, Greenland's capital, which by itself is home to a third of the island's entire population, as well as other cities like Sisimiut and Ilulissat. It's the population heart of the island, its economic center and center of government, and its regional language has become the official language of Greenland. Roughly 90% of Greenland's population lives in Kita, and the 4 airports that offer international flights are all in the region. It has the warmest weather and is home to the rare pockets of arable land, which, coupled with a lack of sea ice, made it a destination for Viking explorers, Danish colonists, and the waves of Inuit from Canada who populated the island. The 3 regions, though, no longer have official status, and Greenland's local government is split into 5 different municipalities. They are essentially provinces, but govern only a few thousand people each. The towns and cities within them don't have governments and are managed by the municipalities, which govern areas at times stretching from coast to coast of the island. Avannaata, meaning the northern, encompasses both the populated western section of Avanna as well as the northern half of Kita, all the way south to Disco Bay, which juts into the island from Baffin Bay. At 500,000 square kilometers, it's Greenland's largest municipality and its second most populous, with 10,726 residents. Its main cities are Qaanaaq, the center of the Inukhoi population in the north, Upangavik, and Uummannaq, both in small islands off the mainland, and Ilulissat, Avanata's capital, Greenland's third largest city and main tourist hub, home to nearly half of the municipality's population, as well as the Ilulissat Ice Fjord, a beautiful fjord that pumps out massive icebergs into Disco Bay. Just to the south, the municipality of Qeqertalik, meaning the one with islands, extends 92 miles south to the fjord of Naasutuk and is located entirely within Kita. It includes Disco Island north of the rest of the municipality. It's the second smallest municipality in area and the smallest in population, with just 6,340 residents. It's home to 4 main towns, 2 of which, Kongatsiaq and Qasigiannguit, are located on Greenland's mainland, and the city of Qeqertarsuaq, which is also the Qalathlit name for Disco Island, sits on the large island, but most of Qeqertalik's population is in Aasiaat, its capital, a port city on an island in Disco Bay, Greenland's 5th largest city, and the largest not located on the main island. To the south, Qeqata, meaning center, is also relatively small as Greenlandic municipalities go, stretching 200 miles to the south to just north of the Nuuk Fjord. It's in the middle of the municipalities by both area, population, and population density. Located entirely within Kita and home to 9,378 people. It's home to 2 main towns. Maniitsoq, on an island in the Labrador Sea, is Greenland's 6th largest, and Sisimiut, further north, is the island's 2nd largest, with 5,620 people. Greenland's 2nd largest city has a more urbanized feel with some block-style apartments like those you can find in Nuuk, and is a fast-growing and important port city. Additionally, it's home to Kangerlussuaq, a small town which, located in a valley, was the site of a U.S. Air Force base which has since been returned to Greenland and converted into an airport. Kangerlussuaq is Greenland's busiest airport. Most international flights to the island land there, as it's one of only 2 airports that can take big airliner jets, and then passengers take smaller propeller planes to their specific destinations. To the south and east of Qeqata is Greenland's largest municipality by both land area and population, home to 23,123 people. Sermersooq, meaning the place of much ice, is located in both Kita and Tunu, stretching south to the Alangorsuaq Fjord and cutting diagonally to the east coast at the Timiarmut Fjord. It then contains the rest of the inhabited part of Tunu, all the way north to Jameson Land, the peninsula home to Ittoqqortoormiit. Along with the Tunu cities like Ittoqqortoormiit and Tasiilaq, it's home to cities in Kita like Paamiut. Its most important city, though, and the home of over 80% of its population, is Nuuk. Sermersooq in Greenland's capital, and by far the island's largest and most urbanized city, which I'll talk more about later. Finally, on the southern tip of the island is Kuujjuaq, meaning simply the south. It's Greenland's smallest municipality at just 32,000 square kilometers and is home to only 6,439 people, but is the most densely populated of the 5. Located in both Kita and Tunu, the part within Tunu is uninhabited. The municipality is probably Greenland's most geographically unusual. A system of fjords cut deep inland, and southern Greenland's relatively warmer weather has made the land around these fjords one of the few areas where farming is possible, with potato and grass farming and sheep grazing important industries in the rolling hills and fjords of Kuujjuaq. This was the eastern settlement, Eric the Red's Norse colony, and is home to beautiful ruins of Viking churches and turf homes across the region. It's also the only part of the island that can support extensive tree cover. The Kingwa Valley is home to Greenland's only natural forest. The warmer south of the island is home to towns like Narsaq, Nanortalik, and Greenland's 4th largest city, Qaqortoq, as well as Narsarsuaq, its other main international airport. These 5 municipalities don't encompass the entire island, however. Completely surrounded by Avanata, Bidufik, the U.S. Space Force base, is part of Greenland but managed by the United States. Far to the north, it's essential for American security. As Greenland sits between the U.S., Russia, and Europe, in the event of nuclear war, missiles would pass over Greenland. U.S. missile warning systems at Bidufik would warn the U.S. and their allies of their approach, giving them time to respond. Formerly known as the Thule Air Force Base, the construction of the base took the site of an Inukhoi town called Bidufik, whose residents were forced to move north, where they founded Kanak. A quarter of the island isn't part of any municipality at all, but an enormous national park, taking up nearly 1 million square kilometers of eastern Avana and northern Tunu. Northeast Greenland National Park is far and away the largest national park on the planet. Save for some research stations like Danmarkshavn, Zackenberg, Summit Base, and Station Nord, the park is completely uninhabited and has no public infrastructure or real way to get there besides a boat. It's probably one of, if not the, most isolated and truly untouched stretches of protected wilderness in the world. Greenland's history has been shaped by a series of migrations onto the island from what is now northern Canada, whose ancestors crossed into North America from Siberia. The first people on the island were thought to have arrived in 2500 BC. Various successive groups settled Greenland, but eventually the island's challenging climate meant that overhunting and overfishing, as well as fluctuations in temperatures, could render the island uninhabitable, and most of these societies died off, disappearing from the island completely, leaving only artifacts behind, but no trace of the language they spoke or even what they would have called themselves. The most recent of these groups, known only as the Dorset after Baffin Island's Cape Dorset, primarily lived in Avana and disappeared from Greenland by the 1300s. Around the 9th century, Norse settlers were pushing out of their homeland in Scandinavia, launching Viking raids across Europe and founding settlements across the continent. The island of Iceland, which had been uninhabited save for perhaps a few Irish monks, was one of their main areas of settlement. Norse settlers and people they'd kidnapped from Scotland and Ireland in Viking raids populated the island in a period of less than 60 years that's known in Iceland as the Age of Settlement. One of the Vikings who moved from Norway to Iceland was Eric Thorvaldsson, or Eric the Red. His son, Leif Erikson, was born in Iceland, but after Eric, who seemingly had a bad temper, killed several of his neighbors, the family was banished. Though the story often goes that Eric was the first European to reach Greenland, Vikings had attempted to settle there before, but never successfully, and it had mostly been ignored. Eric was likely aware of the island's existence when he fled west, but most Vikings knew little about it. He explored the island and looked for areas that were warmer and suitable for settlement. Once he was allowed to return to Iceland, he did, telling stories of an island he pitched as Greenland. Iceland had been struck by a famine, and the idea of this green land appealed to many. 14 ships made it with Eric on his return journey to Greenland, and the Icelandic Vikings founded 2 colonies, the eastern settlement in Kujaflek at the southern tip of the island, and the western settlement in Sermersuk on the Nuuk Fjord, not far from Greenland's capital city today. If you consider Greenland part of North America, they were the first Europeans to successfully settle on the continent, though not on the mainland. Bjarni Herjolfsson, a Viking from Norway hoping to visit his family in Greenland, went way off course and found a land that was significantly more lush and hospitable, but decided not to land as he wanted to make it to Greenland. None of the Greenland Vikings took Bjarni's tale particularly seriously at first, but after a few years they became interested. Eventually, Eric's son, Leif Erikson, set out to follow Bjarni's path in reverse. Just as Bjarni had said, he reached 3 coasts, a cold land of rocky cliffs and barren mountain peaks he called Helluland, the land of stone slabs, thought to be Nunavut's Baffin Island, a greener landscape he called Markland, the land of forests, thought to be Labrador, and a more lush, hospitable, and warmer area he called Vinland, the land of wine, thought to be Newfoundland. Leif returned to Greenland, the first European to reach the North American mainland. Another Greenland Viking, Thorfinn Karlsefni, led a group of colonists from Greenland, founding a colony on Vinland that's potentially the Newfoundland archaeological site of Landsaw Meadows. The Vinland colony didn't last too long, however, before they returned to Greenland. As the Dorset were disappearing from the island, a new migration wave was pushing through the Arctic. A people referred to today as the Thule had moved west from Alaska and were settling throughout the islands and coasts of the North American Arctic. By 1300, they'd crossed from Ellesmere Island to northern Greenland, and from there moved south along the island's coasts, at times interacting with the Viking settlements. As weather cooled during the Little Ice Age, the farms of the Greenland Vikings could no longer support them, and by the 1300s, the Viking colonies died out, and the Thuli were the only ones on the island. Their descendants became the various Inuit peoples that lived throughout Alaska, northern Canada, and Greenland. Though people moved down the east coast, finding it too inhospitable, they moved west, and for a while all of Greenland's population lived in Kita. In the 1700s, though, settlers from Kita moved east and founded Tassilok, from there spreading throughout Tunu. Living in relative separation from one another due to the ice sheet and the cold weather of the Little Ice Age, their languages diverged, and they became known as the Tunumit people, distinct from the Kalathlit on the west coast. In the 1700s, people known as the Copper Inuit from Victoria and Banks Islands in what is now Canada's Northwest Territories migrated to northern Greenland, where their descendants became known as the Inukhoi. In the meantime, Scandinavia had been going through periods of political upheaval. Norway had claimed ownership of Greenland through the Viking colonies, though in reality they had never exercised much control over them. The Greenland Vikings had governed themselves and never stretched their influence across more than the eastern and western settlements. Norway's lack of actual power in the Greenland settlements was perhaps best exemplified by the fact that, though the settlements had died out in the 1300s, for the next 4 centuries they believed they still existed, despite having absolutely no contact with them. In 1573, Denmark invaded Norway, and for centuries after, it was governed as a joint kingdom called Denmark-Norway. Though it was referred to as a union, in practice Denmark was in control, ruling not only Norway, but its former Viking colonies, such as Iceland and the Faroe Islands. Through the fact that Icelandic Vikings had once settled in Greenland, Denmark claimed control of the island as well, and kept its claims after it lost Norway to Sweden in 1814. In 1721, they sent a Lutheran priest from Norway called Hans Ea to Greenland, hoping to re-establish connections with the Greenland Vikings and convert them to Christianity. When Ea arrived, he was surprised to find that the Vikings were gone, and had been for hundreds of years. Landing at first at the island of Kongek at the mouth of the Nuuk Fjord, after a few years he moved further inland to a small town called Nuuk, where he founded a colony he called Gudhoop, or Good Hope. Greenlandic people were often treated poorly under Danish rule, and colonialism had disastrous effects on their culture and way of life. Over time, most Greenlanders were converted to Christianity. Today, less than 1% follow traditional Inuit faiths. They made Danish the language of the land, suppressing Kalathlisut, Tunumit, and Inuktun, to the point that the languages were in danger of becoming lost forever. As in Canada and the US, boarding schools were used to stamp out the culture of the country. Perhaps most consequential were Danish economic policies, which put Greenland under Danish monopoly for resource extraction, blocking it off from the outside world all the way until 1940. No one but the Danes could enter, though supposedly done to protect Greenland's traditional way of life from a modernizing outside world. Danish colonial rule had been upending that very way of life. Greenlanders lived a rural lifestyle, hunting and fishing, and spread out across small towns throughout the island. But Denmark wanted to profit from Greenland's rich fishing waters. Though Danish settlers did move to the island, Inuit people always made up the large majority of the population, and as such, Denmark needed them to work in the fishing industry. While Greenlanders once fished for food, under Danish rule they would now be fishing for money, most of which would go to Denmark and Danish merchants. For a long time, administered as 2 separate colonies, South Greenland, with its capital at Ea's colonial city of Gudhope, and North Greenland, administered from a town on Disco Island called Godhavn. They were joined together in 1911 and governed from Gudhope, the southern capital. The industrialization of the fishing industry would be more profitable if shipping costs could be lowered by consolidating the ports, harbors, and fishing vessels in a few cities as opposed to across the island. They pushed urbanization, founding colonial towns on the west coast with Danish names like Gudhub, Holsteinborg, Jakobshavn, Iasmina, and Julianahub, moving people from small towns across the island into fishing cities on the west coast and leaving ghost towns in their wake. Today these cities are Nuuk, Sisimiut, Ilulissat, Asiat, and Qaqortoq, the 5 largest in Greenland. This caused a major population upheaval, and as the industrialization of the island saw much of Greenland's long-standing traditional ways of life change, rates of suicide and alcoholism rose, and today are among the highest in the world. During World War II, Denmark was invaded by Germany. To protect it from the Nazis, the U.S. occupied it for the duration of the war, from 1941 to 1945. During American occupation and afterwards during the Cold War, in which the U.S. continued to have a major presence on Greenland, they built a number of military installations across the island, most of which are now in Greenland's hands, used as research stations, ports, and international airports. Perhaps the most impressive was Camp Century, a now abandoned base that sits completely under the ice sheet. Tunnels and rooms carved into walls of ice, in what was known as Project Iceworm. The only part of Greenland still under U.S. military control is Bidufik Space Base, built as Thule Air Base. Construction of the base was important for U.S. national security, but also had major impacts on the Inukhoi, resulting in the forced relocation of one of their largest towns further north, where those who moved founded Qaanaaq. The island's current political status is unique and at times contentious. By the beginning of the 1900s, Denmark's only remaining colonies were Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands, a small archipelago lying between Iceland, Scotland, and Norway, home to a population of around 52,000 people who speak a Nordic language called Faroese. Iceland gained home rule in 1918 and full independence in 1944. By 1948, the Faroe Islands gained home rule, and Greenland would join them in 1979 and gain further self-rule in 2009. Today, all three, Greenland, the Faroes, and the main part of Denmark, called Metropolitan Denmark, are all under the rule of the Kingdom of Denmark and are together referred to as the Danish Realm. For the most part, under self-rule, Greenland controls most of its internal affairs, things like local government, local courts, and has control over its immigration system and natural resources. On the other hand, areas like foreign policy and defense are controlled by Denmark. They use Denmark's currency, the Danish krone, and don't have the ability to have their own citizenship. All Greenlanders are Danish citizens and have a Danish passport that specifies that they live in Greenland. Though Denmark is part of the European Union, Greenland left the European Community, the EU's predecessor, in 1985 so it could maintain control of fishing in its territorial waters, and is today considered an overseas collectivity and territory, meaning it's outside the EU but maintains a special status and close relationship with it. Though it isn't part of the EU, because all Greenlanders are Danish citizens, they are also EU citizens and have the freedom to travel, move, and work throughout the European Union, though EU citizens from outside Denmark cannot do the same in Greenland, as it's outside the EU. Though officially equal partners, constituent countries of one realm, Greenland functions more as a highly autonomous region. It elects its own Greenlandic parliament to control domestic policy, but only elects 2 seats within the Danish parliament, which controls its foreign affairs, compared to the 175 elected by Metropolitan Denmark. Its situation is perhaps most similar to that of the Cook Islands and Niue, which are part of a realm with New Zealand, who controls their defense and foreign policy. The strong autonomy provided by self-rule, on the other hand, gives Greenland the right to become independent should the people of the island support independence in a referendum. The main obstacle to independence is the block grant, a payment equaling about $500 million that Denmark gives Greenland each year. For an island with such a small population and tiny GDP, similar to that of Belize or the Central African Republic, this block grant is essential. It makes up 20% of Greenland's entire GDP and over half of its government's budget. Home rule has been a major step up from direct colonial administration, providing Greenland with self-government, which has allowed it to undergo a very successful cultural and linguistic revival, and the renaming of their cities from Danish to Greenlandic names. Greenland is moving closer to independence. The governing coalition and the Prime Minister, Mutaiya, are strong supporters of independence, and polls show around 67% of Greenland's population supports it. In 2023, the year I'm writing this, Greenland took perhaps its largest step towards independence since self-rule. The government presented a new constitution that would go into effect upon independence. Throughout Greenland, it's rare to see Danish flags flown except in official government locations, whereas the Greenlandic flag can be seen everywhere. From my own observation, it was far more common to see Faroese and Icelandic flags, which there were a fair number of, than Danish flags. Along with the push for independence and dealing with a serious epidemic of depression, alcoholism, and suicide, Greenland faces another major issue. Though it's often politicized, the greenhouse effect is very real and is having a particularly damaging effect on Greenland. The world's second largest ice sheet is melting at alarming rates as temperatures rise, and with less ice to reflect sunlight back, rates of melting increase as ice cover decreases. A country with such a small population and little fuel consumption, industry, or agriculture, Greenland emits less CO2 than even places like Aruba, Bhutan, and East Timor. At the same time, it's feeling the brunt of the impact, and as the ice sheet and sea ice recedes, its landscape is changing rapidly. It will likely continue to be a major problem for the island as the years progress. From 1950 onward, Greenland's population has doubled, but it appears to be nearing its peak. As its growth rate declines and its population ages, Greenland's already small population is projected to enter a dangerously steep decline. At the same time, trends of urbanization that were pushed under colonial rule are continuing, as young Greenlanders are seeing less of a future in poorer job prospects in small towns and moving to the city. While Greenland's population growth has been relatively stagnant, Nuuk's has increased rapidly. People from across the island are flocking to the city, turning it into a meeting point for people from several different cultures and regions. As was the case during the colonial era, this could be detrimental for the survival of the Inuktitut and Tunumit languages, as well as Inukhoi and Tunumit culture, as young Inukhoi and Tunumit people leaving their hometowns for education and job opportunities in the city may assimilate into Kalathlit culture and lose their native languages. On the other hand, modernization has made it easier to travel across the country, and many Greenlanders have family and friends throughout the island and cultural connections to all three regions, and it's common for people to travel between them and visit their friends and relatives, maintaining tight-knit connections over thousands of miles of distance. Greenland's main language, Kalathlisut, native to the people of Kita, the western coastal region that's Greenland's population center, is often referred to as Greenlandic and is the country's official language. Tunumit and Inuktitut, the languages spoken in the east and north of the island, respectively, have far fewer speakers as the regions have much smaller populations and are often considered dialects of Greenlandic, with Kalathlit the standardized form. On the other hand, the languages are quite different from one another, and though they are somewhat mutually intelligible, they are better classified as distinct languages rather than dialects. People in the eastern and northern regions, Tunu and Avana, often understand Kalathlisut because it's taught in schools, but native Kalathlisut speakers from Kita typically don't speak Tunumit or Inuktitut. All three of the languages are part of the Inuit language family, related to languages like Yupik in Alaska and Inuktitut in Nunavut. The Inuktitut language of northern Greenland is actually more closely related to Inuktitut in Canada than to the other languages of Greenland because the Inukhoi people who speak it arrived in a later migration in the 1700s from Canada. All in all, Kalathlisut, or Greenlandic, is spoken by about 78% of the population, Tunumit by 5%, and Inuktitut by just about 1%. Kalathlisut, once threatened under Danish colonialism, has seen a major successful revival since the beginning of Home Rule, and today is the most spoken language in the entire Inuit language family anywhere in the world. Additionally, Danish is the first language of about 12% of Greenland's population, spoken by descendants of Danish colonists or by more recent immigrants, who make up about 8% of the island's population, as well as some Greenlandic people, as the language was pushed on most of the island during colonial rule. Most Greenlanders, though, speak Danish as a second language, and it's widely used by elites in government and business. It's common to see signs, menus, and labels in grocery stores in Danish, not Kalathlisut, because it's a go-between language most people understand. On top of that, English is widely understood as well as the language of international business. About 60% of Greenland's population understands some English. This makes it an incredibly multilingual country, with large portions of the population fluent in Kalathlisut, Danish, and English, as well as languages like Tunumit and Inuktitut spoken in their respective regions. The ethnic breakdown of the island is similar to the linguistic one. Around 91% of Greenlanders are Inuit, most of them Kalalit or West Greenlandic, with about 5 and 1% of the population identifying as ethnically Tunumit or Inukhoi, East or North Greenlandic, respectively. An additional 8% of the population is ethnically Danish, though many people trace their ancestry to both Inuit and Danish ancestors, and many Inuit people on the island have some Danish ancestry as a legacy of colonialism. On top of that, in recent decades, jobs in fishing, construction, and the service industry have brought in populations of immigrants to the island, the vast majority of whom are Filipino and Thai, though all in all they only make up about 1.5% of the population. In Nuuk, though, you can find some Filipino and Thai restaurants and markets. Outside the island, there's a significant Greenlandic diaspora. As Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, Greenlanders and Danes are able to move and work freely between the two constituent countries, and around 18,000 Greenlandic people live in metropolitan Denmark, a small proportion of Denmark's population, but about a quarter of the global population of Greenlandic Inuit people. Nuuk is by far Greenland's largest and most important city, nearly 4 times the size of the next largest city, Sisimiut. With mountains and fjords hemming in city development, Greenland has no suburbs, and urban areas never extend beyond the city. As I mentioned before, cities themselves have no governments, and are governed solely by the municipality they're located in. I visited Nuuk myself 4 months ago. My brother and I arrived in a small propeller plane with about a dozen passengers from Reykjavik, Iceland. Only 4 global airports offer flights into Greenland, 3 of which are in Iceland. Reykjavik and the nearby international airport in Keflavik offer flights into a number of Greenlandic cities, and Akureyri is the only way to fly to Ittoqqortoormiit. On top of that, you can fly from Copenhagen to Kongershissuaq and Narsarsuaq, the main international airports, in larger jets. Nuuk's airport itself is tiny. Passengers check in, pick up luggage, and wait for flights all in one small building, walk out on the tarmac carved into the rock to board flights. It feels strangely like a much larger city than a town of just 19,000. Large apartment blocks are commonplace, and it's home to more than a few tall buildings. It's filled with multi-story high-rises, large block apartment complexes built during Denmark's push for modernization, when entire small towns were uprooting and moving to Nuuk. Supposedly one building, now demolished, was at one point home to 1% of Greenland's entire population. Each of these buildings, though, are fairly spaced out. Boulders and rocky hillsides fill the city, and nearby mountains are formidable natural barriers. Buildings, playgrounds, roads, and parks all are carved onto the rock, and there's some grass and greenery but no trees. As more people move into Nuuk, new neighborhoods are being constructed in areas far from downtown, all the way across the harbor. This gives it an urbanized layout unlike anything I've ever seen. A city that has a small population, but at the same time takes up a very large land area, while many residential units themselves are dense high-rises. The only public transit is an hourly bus, and the large distance between places in the city means that many people own cars, despite the fact that roads barely extend beyond the city itself and don't provide access to anywhere outside of Nuuk. Downtown is filled with high-rises, banks, hotels, restaurants, and large grocery stores, as well as Greenland's tallest building, Nuuk Center. As Greenland's largest city, sometimes called the Arctic metropolis, Nuuk has to provide a wide array of services for whatever people may need, as leaving the country for big city necessities would be a logistical nightmare. Because of this, the town of just 19,000 is home to an airport, the National Museum, a multi-sport stadium complex, a major industrial port, a hospital, art museum, cultural center, shopping mall, car dealerships, theaters, restaurants, a golf course, hiking trails, gyms, bars and clubs, and a boardwalk. It's also home to Greenland's National University and the government offices of both Sermersooq and the national government. Next to downtown is the Old City, where historic churches, statues, and colorful wooden houses sit along the waterfront. Núpkangerloa, the Nuuk Fjord, is massive, and the city's location at the tip of a peninsula stretching out into it provides spectacular views throughout the city of the Nuuk Fjord, the countless islands off the coast, the strikingly tall and glacially sharp mountain peaks, and the Labrador Sea stretching off into the horizon. The city, like many in the Arctic, is filled with beautiful, brightly colored houses, and the island peak of Sermitsiaq provides a stunning backdrop to the city. It's a fascinating city with friendly, outgoing people from all over the island living there. Food in Greenland is either processed and shipped in, or is local, made from what's available in the land and sea. Unsurprisingly, there's a ton of fish and seafood available, and other foods like reindeer, whale, and muskox that you might not find elsewhere are pretty commonplace. Religiously, most of Greenland is Christian, predominantly Lutheran, and the Church of Greenland, which most people belong to, is a diocese of the Church of Denmark. Many people make use of the nature at their doorstep. Hunting, fishing, mountain biking, ice climbing, skiing, dog sledding, ice fishing, and hiking are popular. Many people have boats and spend time out on the water. Kayaking originated among Inuit peoples, and the word kayak originally comes from Greenland. Other than the block grant, which makes up about a quarter of Greenland's economy and which many people are dependent on for jobs, the rest of the economy is dominated by the fishing industry. Fish make up 90% of their exports, but minerals are growing in importance, with Greenland home to large amounts of rare earths. Major companies include Royal Arctic, Royal Greenland, and Air Greenland. Their main newspaper is Sermitsiaq AG, based in Nuuk. The island has one university, the University of Greenland, or Ilisimatusarfik, in Nuuk. Soccer or football is popular, and Greenland has a national team, though it's not part of FIFA. They're part of several sporting associations like the International Island Games, along with other territories and islands of European countries, and the Arctic Winter Games, which various countries, cities, regions, and provinces throughout the Arctic participate in, and which Greenland has hosted multiple times. Greenland's home government is a parliamentary democracy that recognizes Queen Margrethe II of Denmark as their monarch. The current Prime Minister, Mutta Eya, governs a coalition between his pro-independence party and a social democratic party, and is a major advocate for independence. Greenland's economic changes have been a major source of transformation on the island in recent decades. Economic concepts around finance and statistics can seem difficult to grasp, but there's a fun and easy way to learn more about them. Today's sponsor, Brilliant, is the best way to learn data science, math, and computer science in a fun and interactive way. Brilliant has thousands of courses available and adds new ones every month. It doesn't matter if you have lots of experience or are just getting started. Brilliant will customize their content to fit your needs and let you work at whatever pace works best for you. Data skills are only getting more in demand, which is why I love their new Data Analysis Fundamentals course. With just a few quick lessons, you get to analyze real data and draw interesting conclusions from it. That kind of analysis is a huge part of geography, and is a strategy I use frequently when I'm making videos for That Is Interesting. The best part is, my viewers can get the first 30 days of Brilliant for free, and the first 200 get 20% off an annual plan. Just visit brilliant.org/thatisinteresting. That's brilliant.org/thatisinteresting for 30 days of Brilliant for free and 20% off. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to check out my other videos in The Nation Explained, as well as my series on the United States, the US Explained. My next video in The Nation Explained will be on Iceland, a country very close to Greenland, and one that I also visited this summer, right before I went to Greenland. So get excited, and if you're from there, send me some info and help me out. Also, if you want to hear me talk more about my travels to Greenland and other parts of the world, go check out Riffing and Ranting, the podcast I'm co-hosting. There's links in the description, and it's on all the major podcasting apps. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you learned something new. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover the countries, cities, people, and places of the world and beyond. These videos will leave you saying, "That is interesting."